Everybody, Melissa back with the next part of the presentation called Shirley and Oz Connections. I'm going to ask you to bear with me. I am sure at some point I'm going to hit the wrong part of my screen and get to a slide that I'm not ready for. It's inevitable, so I'll just ask you to bear with me as I try to write that along the way. We'll start by pointing out a fantasy piece that we have here. It's a paper doll drawn by Shirley fan and talented artist Connie Marshall. It's her imagining of Shirley as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. For those of you who don't know much about the child star Shirley Temple, Shirley Jane Temple, I'll give you what I hope to be a brief introduction. Shirley was born on April 23rd, 1928 in Santa Monica, California. At the age of 3, her parents put her in dancing school, and as they were close to some of the studios, fate would have it, a local talent scout came to her dancing school one day, found her supposedly under the piano, chose her for roles in a series of short films. She did short films and did some bit parts in feature films until 1934, when she got her big break, as they say in the biz, to perform in a little-known, except for Shirley Temple, film called Stand Up and Cheer. This is the Shirley image that almost everyone conjures up when they think of her, the little girl in the red and white polka dot dress singing "Daddy, Take a Bow." This is the costume as it appeared in July 2015, when it was auctioned off. In the background, we have Woolsey Ackerman. You may know him. He is a Judy fan, an Oz fan, and a Shirley fan. He was there with me as well. After that, Shirley's fame skyrocketed. She went on to make films in 1934 through 1940 as part of her 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. She sang on the Good Ship Lollipop in a film called Bright Eyes. Fun fact, the ship is not a boat. It is a plane. They were known as airships back in those days. She made films such as The Little Colonel with Bill Bojangles Robinson, Captain January, Heidi, and The Little Princess. All of these films, interestingly enough, based on children's literature, not unlike The Wizard of Oz. In 1940, Shirley and her parents parted ways with 20th Century Fox. Her career as a child star was over. She attended an all-girls school, but continued to make films as a teenager. In 1945, at the age of just 17, she married John Agar. And at the time, John Agar was enlisted, but the war ended soon after, and he decided he wanted to become an actor too. Coincidence? We don't know. They went on to star together in 2 films, including Fort Apache, and Shirley made several more films as an adult. Their marriage produced a daughter, Linda Susan, but unfortunately the marriage didn't last. After their divorce in 1950, Shirley married Charles Black. Charles Black won her heart by admitting that he'd never even seen a Shirley Temple film. He didn't even know anything about her. They went on to have 2 more children, Charles Black Jr. and Laurie. At that point, she gave up her film career, but returned for a time to the entertainment field in 1958 with her television series, first known as Shirley Temple's Storybook. We'll talk more about that later because, of course, she did an episode based on The Land of Oz. When that series ended after 2 seasons, she did give up the biz for good and went on to have a very fulfilling career in diplomacy. She was a United States delegate. She was an ambassador to Ghana in the 70s. In the 80s and early 90s, she was the ambassador to what's now the Czech Republic, then known as Czechoslovakia. Shirley died in February of 2014 of COPD, and she was a lifelong smoker. In April of 2016, Shirley's family was in attendance at the unveiling of the United States Post Office postage stamp in her honor. And I'm happy to say that I was able to be there as well. I may or may not have shed a lot of tears. Those of you who know me know the answer to that question. Now let's talk about Shirley and Oz. Shirley loved The Wizard of Oz. She had all the Oz books. She read all of the Oz books. Here on the left, we have Shirley in her playroom in her home in Brentwood, California, and prominently displayed, right within reach, are her Oz books. A few years later, Shirley's desk has gotten a grown-up upgrade. She certainly has more grown-up look with her darker curls pulled back, but she has not outgrown the Oz books because they appear on the shelf behind her as well. You can see even a few more of the volumes are visible in this photo. Here's a close-up of the shelves in both 1937 and 1940. If you look closely, you can see some ragged edges on the dust jackets, indicating that these were well-loved books. These were an early edition. I am sure that you know much better than I the edition that they were, but they were certainly prized possessions in Shirley's life. After Shirley's death, there was an auction, 3 auctions actually, for her memorabilia, and they sold everything. What did not appear at the auction were her set of Oz books. When I had an opportunity to talk to her son Charlie about that a year or so later, I asked him, and he indicated to me that that was the one thing of all of Shirley's items that the family chose to keep, one of the very few things. Made me pretty happy to know that of all of her items, that's what the family wanted to keep. In her autobiography that was published in 1988, Shirley writes about writes about The Wizard of Oz. Every night when Shirley was getting ready for bed, her mom would pin up her curls so that she'd be camera ready the next day, 56 to be exact, and her father would read to her from one of the Oz books. Witches, wicked witches, and munchkin people became familiar friends, Shirley said. One evening, she told her parents, "I'd like to go to Kansas and see Dorothy, the one blown away in a cyclone." Gertrude, her mother, responded, "Someday, I want you to play Dorothy." Shirley, like many little children of the time, believed she was real, the character of Dorothy, and answered, "How could I play Dorothy? She's real. What I'd like to do is visit her." It's nice to know that the Wizard of Oz books had the same impact on the most famous child star in the world as they did on all the children that would come to read them. We talked briefly about the myth that existed of Shirley being Dorothy, being considered Dorothy for the 1939 film. Of course, that did not happen. Shirley believed it herself, but Shirley also said that sometimes the gods know best. And even this uber Shirley Temple fan can happily admit that Judy was the only choice to play Dorothy. But long before 1938, as they planned the making of The Wizard of Oz, Shirley and Oz were connected, at least in the press. It only made sense. Shirley was the most famous child star, and the Oz books were among the most popular series of books for children. So it was not unusual to think that the two would merge at some point. As early as 1935, there were reports that there was going to be a film or series of films starring Shirley as Dorothy. In the first video, I showed you the dress that I've come to call my Shirley's Dorothy dress. Of course, it is an exact match, but it certainly does resemble the Adrian costume. You can see that Shirley wore this dress in her private life. Here she is on her way to the set of the Bluebird. She wore it in publicity stills, and she wore it on a number of other occasions that we've been able to document. Because we know when those photographs were taken, we know that she wore it in 1939. So maybe she didn't get to play Dorothy in the film, but maybe she played Dorothy herself. No evidence to support this, but it's a possibility. Here's a little side story. In April of 2019, I got an opportunity to visit Shirley's childhood home in Brentwood, California. It's owned by private owners. You can see them in the back here. And it was, as you can imagine, an absolutely incredible opportunity. When I knew it was happening, after I composed myself, I knew I wanted to reunite the Shirley's Dorothy Dress with the approximate spot where it stood back in August of 1939. Back in August of 1939, fans approached Shirley at her gate at her Brentwood home, snapped several pictures, and did acquire her autograph. And when they did, Shirley was wearing this dress. So yes, I traveled across the country with the dress in tow, brought it out, and asked the owners if I could take some photos with it. They did not call the men in the white coats, and they didn't even laugh. They thought it was pretty cool, and I thought it was incredible. So it was reunited with the same spot, in the same spot that it had been all those years before. Now, of course, Shirley did not play Dorothy in 1939's Wizard of Oz, but she went on to make a film called The Bluebird that many consider to be Fox's answer to Oz. There were many ways in which they were similar. The first being that The Bluebird was based on children's literature, much like The Wizard of Oz. The Bluebird was a play written by Belgian playwright Maurice Maeterlinck in 1908, not long, of course, after The Wizard of Oz. And here we have Shirley in that dress on the set of The Bluebird. This is Walter Lang, her director. This is Arthur Miller, the cameraman, and the other people who are behind the scenes of that film. It was a fantasy film, much like The Wizard of Oz. And like Oz, it began in black and white. The prologue establishes Shirley's character, Meetil, as a very unhappy, rather bratty little girl, not satisfied with her lot in life. Her mother says if you can't learn to be happy in yourself, then you never will be happy anyway. That night, she and her brother Tiltil go to bed, and they are awakened by a fairy. The fairy is named Berry Loon in The Bluebird, played by Jessie Ralph. Not unlike the fairy or the Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz. Of course, not nearly as attractive as our Billy Burke. But like Glinda, Berry Loon sends the children on a quest to find the Bluebird. If they find the Bluebird, then they can achieve the happiness that they're looking for. Not unlike the quest that Dorothy and her friends go on in Oz. Now, Oz has many more musical numbers. Shirley's film had only one, but Shirley did meet up or take along with her friends to help her on her quest. She brings with her her dog and her cat. Let's get back there. There we go. Brings with her her dog and her cat, who take on human form. Eddie Collins plays her dog Tylo, and Gail Sondergaard plays her cat Tylette. And at the time, many reviewers compared, keep doing that, sometimes unfavorably, Eddie Collins' performance as the bulldog as being too close to that of Bert Lahr's as the Cowardly Lion. But there were quite a lot of similarities. Now we're ready for this slide. Like in Oz, Shirley and her friends, who now include Light, who has come to life, embark on a journey. They go many different places, like Dorothy did. Dorothy went to Munchkinland and to the haunted forest and to the apple orchard, and you know as well as I do all the places she went to. Meetil, Shirley's character, visited the land of luxury, the land of the past, the land of the future, all the time seeking the bluebird of happiness. In the bluebird, there is a villain. Of course, the villain is the wonderful Wicked Witch of the West, is played by Margaret Hamilton. In the bluebird, it is Tylette the cat, who is played by Gail Sondergaard. Gail, of course, would go on, or had been previously considered for the role of the Wicked Witch. Talk about that in a moment. At the end of the film, which interestingly enough does not return to black and white, the film turns to color as soon as the children are awakened by the fairy and remains that way for the rest of the film. Part of the reason may be that it's not established that it was a dream for the children. The two children share the same memories, and therefore, as far as the children are concerned, it really did happen. However, Shirley awakens, her attitude has changed. She looks to see the the brown bird that she had caught earlier has now become a bluebird. Thus, she's found the bluebird of happiness, which was always at home to begin with. Reminds me of, if I ever go looking for my heart's desire, I won't look any further than my own backyard. The sentiment was exactly the same. There was even a "there's no place like home" moment at the end of the film. Meetil is so happy that she's found happiness that she wants to share it with a sick little girl and brings it to her house. Let's take a look at the very ending of The Bluebird.
Mommy, everything's so wonderful, isn't it? So bright and shiny and beautiful. Is it? But this thing's stone then. Oh no, it's different. What's different? Your daddy got us a daybreak to make a cage for your bird. You like it?
Here's the moment that she discovers that the once brown bird is blue.
We looked everywhere for it. Everywhere. And all the time it was right here.
With her newfound happiness, she decides that she wants to share it.
She's just happy.
The bluebird has brought renewed strength to the little girl who'd been sick all winter.
Is the bluebird business letting go? Oh, Angel, I can't believe it. Angel, it's a miracle. I was running to your father. Gently. Oh, he's so soft and warm. Your smoothies it's gone. Neither. I'm so happy. Now it's gone. Don't worry, Angela. We'll find it again. Oh, we can't ever. Oh, yes, we can. I know we can. How do you know? Are you sure we do? Yes, Angela, I'm sure. Because now we know where to look for it. Don't we?
That ending always reminded me of "there's no place like home." I fell in love with the bluebird the first time I saw it. I was no more than 10. And although it wasn't your typical Shirley movie, Shirley was older, it wasn't a proper musical, and it had a decidedly darker tone to it, I loved it. I wrote in my scrapbook that I kept at the time, the best Shirley Temple movie ever, and I can't help but think that much of it had to do with how it reminded me of The Wizard of Oz, which up until that point, and still continues to be, my favorite film of all time. Here we have some connections with the players of The Wizard of Oz. In 1934, in Bright Eyes, Shirley played with Terry, the Cairn Terrier, that would, of course, go on to fame as Toto in The Wizard of Oz. Shirley and Judy Garland never did make a film together. Shirley signed with MGM Studios, and there was reports of Shirley and Judy working together with Mickey in Babes on Broadway. Shirley in what became the Virginia Wheatler role. There was also talk of Shirley and Judy starring in a Topsy and Eva film. It never did come to fruition. The day that she signed, however, she was escorted around the studio by Judy and Mickey and ran into Spencer Tracy, among others. Here we have Shirley and her then husband, John Agar, at a movie premiere. They happened to be seated right next to Judy and her then husband, Vincent Minnelli. Shirley starred with Jack Haley, who, of course, was the unforgettable Tin Man, in 1936's Poor Little Rich Girl, and then again in 1938 in Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. Shirley also starred with Bert Lahr in 1938, probably just as Lahr was preparing for his role in The Wizard of Oz as the Cowardly Lion. That film was just around the corner. In 1936, Shirley starred in a film called Dimples with Frank Morgan. He, of course, was the wizard, and in addition to several other roles in that film. Shirley writes in her autobiography that Frank Morgan was a scene stealer supreme, and she had to be careful. He would edge her out of the frame. He would take his top hat and place it on the table so that the view of her face was obstructed. She had to be on her game when playing with Frank Morgan. Shirley also played with two actors that were almost in The Wizard of Oz, one being Buddy Ebsen. Shirley and Buddy starred together in 1936's Captain January. Buddy, of course, was the initial choice for the Tin Man, did some filming, and as we all know, had difficulties with the makeup and had to pull out of the production to be replaced, of course, by Jack Haley. Shirley starred, as we talked about before, with Gail Sondergaard in The Bluebird. Gail, right before The Bluebird, was considered for The Wicked Witch of the West. At first, she was all on board because The Wicked Witch was supposed to be a glamorous one. And when it was decided to go in another direction and she would be uglified, she decided to bow out. She wanted to be the pretty witch and not the ugly witch. She did get to be a pretty villain as the cat. Here are just some two last ways in which Shirley and Oz connect. Rankin and Bass are best known for their holiday stop-motion classics like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Year Without a Santa Claus. At one time, Rankin Bass approached Shirley to create an animagic, which was their term for stop-motion, series about Temple's life. Can you imagine? And it would have included her brief connection with the 1939 Wizard of Oz movie classic. Shirley was, by all reports, very positive toward the Shirley-themed series, but legend has it that her agent opted to veto the idea. Not smart, and it never came to be. But the great part about this story is that the prototypes exist, including one of her as Dorothy. These images are courtesy of Rick Goldschmidt, the official historian for Rankin Bass. The prototype next to it is Shirley in one of her film roles, Wee Willie Winkie. What I wouldn't give to have seen that. Some concept art even exists. In 1977, Shirley received the Ruby Slipper Award, which was a life achievement award given by the American Center of Films for Children. It was presented to her by Shari Lewis, and of course, it was a representation of children's films. What better representation than the Ruby Slipper itself? In 2016, at the third of Shirley's auctions, the Ruby Slipper came up. I tried in vain but my pockets just were not deep enough. Don't know who got it. I hope someone out there, maybe one of you knows. I hope someone in the Oz community was able to get that. I had my eye on it, of course, because it tied in my two favorites, Shirley and Oz. Thank you for stopping by. The next presentation, I know I said that there were going to be two parts, but I decided that the Land of Oz really needed its own part of the presentation, and I thought that it might be because some people might want to tune into just that portion. So if you'll bear with me, you can click on the next link that Jane provides you, and you can watch, if you'd like, the presentation about Shirley and the Land of Oz. Thank you very much for coming by. See you next time.